All right. Well, thank you very much for having me. Like I was introduced perfectly, I'm Jacob Gottlieb. I'm the Chief Advancement Officer at JARC, but I will say this is my fourth job title in the organization, and I have a lot of history before that. So when I was growing up, my mom was the community engagement manager for JARC. So she put on all the events that JARC has. As a kid, I really got to know a lot of the people that we serve and really get to know the organization really well. I started working at JARC 4 years ago in philanthropy. And then I transitioned during COVID to the chief of staff, which was sort of like a mini CEO that just helped manage all the different moving pieces, especially during COVID in group homes. It obviously wasn't easy for anybody, but especially in the group home world, it was very difficult for us. So I helped sort of manage that process. Um, Now I'm the chief advancement officer, which I am in charge of sort of philanthropy, marketing, but also messaging, strategy, sort of how we talk about the organization, and a lot of external partnerships as well. So I'll dive right into it. And this is sort of the first disclaimer that I give in any different presentation, but I am not disabled. I can only present, and this whole presentation is going to be information that works for JARC and works for our disabled community. And largely all of this that we're talking about, especially different words, you'll hear me use disabled a lot. You won't hear me say special needs because that's not a term that we use. It's not to say that it's bad. It's just not what we do. And so, this little graphic here in the corner, nothing about us without us, really, I feel that JARC has done a really good job over the 54 years that we've been in existence of really living nothing about us without us. So a lot of the ways and processes that you'll see how JARC operates is because the person served have decided that this is how they want their lives run. And feel free to stop me at any point if you have any questions. Of course, I'll take questions at the end as well. So who does JARC serve? You heard a little bit about it, but JARC serves people with a wide range of abilities, including those needing assistance with every aspect of daily living, those who are aging and medically fragile, and those who need several hours of staff support weekly to live successfully on their own. So our motto sort of at JARC is we want to make sure, and again, so the other disclaimer is that I'm in Michigan. Obviously, it's very different in Pennsylvania. Every state is different. We like to think that Michigan is pretty good, but again, it's all relative. I don't know how it works necessarily with hours and stuff like that in Pennsylvania, but this is sort of a larger overview of how we work. We like to say that we want people with disabilities to live as independently as possible. And that's not as different from you or I if you don't have a disability. I want to live as independently as I can, and so should anybody else. That looks different for different people, right? It looks different for me and my wife living in our house than it looks for maybe my elderly grandparents, or it looks for a kid, right? Or a person with disability. It's all in that same. So that's how we use that language. So JARC staff, I always like to mention our staff because we have 146 direct service providers who collectively provide. Anybody want to guess? It might be hard in this context. How many hours of service per month to more than 140 people? We'll see if anybody wants to give a guess. It's a big number.
Someone said 3,000.
3,000. That would be really
They have
cool.
10,000.
15,000 hours of service. So that is a lot. Yes, I hope someone was right. Congratulations. 15,000 is a lot of hours of service if you think about how all of that adds up. We serve, 140 people, right? A lot of them need 24-hour care. Add that up, multiply by days in the month, in the year, and that's how we end up at 15,000. And that number is probably outdated. But really, those 146 direct service providers do the hardest work. And I sit in the office, and at no point do I think that my job, even raising money, is harder than their job. As you all well know in that room, how hard it is to be a caregiver for anybody with a disability or without. So JARC is not the expert or the authority on disability, and I touched on this a tiny bit at the very beginning, but we do not feel that like what JARC says goes, right? We don't get to decide how the disability community gets to work and how it works out. People with disabilities they are the ones that say, this is the kind of programming I want. These are the activities I want. I like this staff person. I don't like this staff person. And we really try to adhere to that really strongly. And so part of ensuring our person served are engaged with the community, which is part of our mission, includes making sure the community is engaged with JARC. And that's really important. So while we're not experts or authorities on disability, we do oftentimes get people calling us, say, hey, I have this issue in a school, or I don't really know, what to do in this situation. And we like to think that people can come to us if they have questions about the disability community. Oftentimes we'll ask one of our persons served, right? The first answer is always, well, what do they want, right? You can ask them. And if not, if it's not something we can answer, we sort of reroute it to someone else that's in the disability community. So like I mentioned, that my mom was a community engagement manager a couple decades ago now, but we're really lucky to have a full-time grant-funded position to create accessible, age and ability appropriate programming for our person served. And these programs leverage donor dollars, volunteers, and community resources to make for better programs. So that's part of how we engage JARC with the community and how the community engages with JARC. Age and ability are, sorry about my dog. My wife is usually on dog patrol, but if you can hear him, I do apologize. So age and ability are bolded here because a lot of times people think, developmental disability, and they immediately think like coloring books and right, like games and Disney movies. And in some cases, our person served like that. And in a lot of cases, they don't. So we're always really clear to make sure that anything we do is age and ability appropriate, right? We're never going to take somebody to the Empire State Building to do the stairs if they're in a wheelchair, right? That we would never do that. Just it seems obvious, but a lot of times we have community members that plan programs that are not appropriate for the people that we serve. So we have a lot of different activities, all kinds of activities that are again following in these worlds. So JARC Homes, right? So how did we get here? This is the first JARC house. It was opened in 1972. JARC was really at the forefront of this model. And like it said in the introduction, we were started in 1969 because institutions were not an appropriate place for people with disabilities. Parents were concerned. And so they opened this first JARC home. Now we own 13 homes in different conditions and varying accessibility. We think it's totally a success story. We have people that have been living with us for 45 years, right? And I bet 45 years ago, when they moved into their 2-story colonial home, they thought, this is great. This is exactly what I want. And now they're having trouble with the stairs. And it's a success story that they are alive for so long. First of all, I might have it later on, but we talk about life expectancy has really increased, and things are a lot different now than they were, back then when JARC started. So this is sort of getting you in the mind frame of how JARC has changed. Fundamentally, our mission has always been the same: to serve people and adults with developmental disabilities. And how we do that in what locations is the only thing that really changes about our mission. So changing care for changing needs is the perfect sort of framework for it. So JARC's goal is to help people live the lives they want to lead in their homes. If they're unable to live in their home for whatever reason, we have homes. We can help secure market rate apartments. We have other housing options. But the first option, just like if you were aging, if you were living, you would want to live in a home of your own. When JARC started, again, people were in their 30s and their 40s, right? So they were younger. They were coming out of institutions in a lot of cases. And they moved into anywhere that they could. And so this is sort of a person with Down syndrome life expectancy. So in 1960, it was 10 years was the life expectancy for somebody with Down syndrome. And now, or 2021, the last time it was reported, is 60 years, right? So if you think about the entire time that JARC has been around, a person served who was born with Down syndrome in 1969 is in a lot of cases still alive today, which is incredible. But the way that JARC was set up was not ready, was not prepared for that, right? Again, it's totally a success story. JARC actually has in the country the record for the longest life lived from a person with Down syndrome, and they were almost 78. So again, the care that JARC provides helps people to live longer. It's just a proven fact at this point. And JARC and other organizations that are doing this work, it's not just us, but it's proven fact at this point, and we're really proud of that. So this is one of our person served who I saw yesterday, Barbara, and this is Barbara today, right? You would not believe, and I don't think Barbara's parents who helped start JARC, they would not believe that Barbara's still alive in 2023. If you said that to them before they passed away, they would be just over the moon excited. And Barbara lives truly a full an enriched life. Here's Debbie, sitting by a tree. It's a different tree. I confirmed that, but this is, Debbie sitting by a tree, and you can see her needs have changed. I think these powerful images really show how we sort of explain to families when you're signing up for JARC, you're signing up for an entire lifetime with JARC. It is not, it might not be me that's working there in 30, 40, 50 years, but somebody, because JARC as an institution, will be there to take care of your kids. And that's really powerful for families who are aging themselves. They might be worried about sort of how is my son or daughter going to be able to survive, right? And that's sort of what JARC offers, is that lifetime guarantee. This is just, I'll quickly get to this, and I'll get to our integrative neighborhoods program, which is really exciting. We're doing renovations, right? So this house, you can see the old house, the old floor plan, if any of you are familiar, is on the left, and the new one that we're renovating, a pretty, six-figure renovation, is on the right. I'll just call out a few important things that really show how JARC is adapting to the person served and how that continues as part of our theme. So you'll see right here on this side, can you see the cursor, hopefully?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so on this side, you'll see two pretty small and tight bathrooms. And in the new side over here, we've combined that into one large bathroom with a roll-in shower. Over here, they still have a half bathroom that if they need, right? So it's not like we took away everything. And you can see how small that was here and how much larger it's getting here. And that was really important. It's hard to tell, but it was they spend most of their time in this away room here. And so they would have to go all the way out and around to get to this bathroom. And now it's right accessible from that place. All these dark places are ramps that we added, different grading, and the kitchen is totally more open. So again, it's just showing how we're changing our care to fit the needs of the people that we live there, not forcing people who are part of JARC, to adapt to however we need them to live. That doesn't make sense. So does any of this matter before I get into the...
Hey, Jacob,
Yeah.
There's a question.
Sure.
Excuse me, Jacob. I had a question on the house layout you have here. Assuming that this is ADA compliant, all facts
Yes.
and regulations.
Yes, it is. It is not exactly ADA compliant because this is one of our unlicensed homes, so it doesn't have to be. So we really built this house to be fitting for the people who live there and anybody with similar needs that might live there in the future. So while, ADA, we're talking about like 36 inches, ours might be 34, right? We like to say this house is in the spirit of ADA, but it is not exactly to that code because it doesn't have to be. In our next house that we're doing, and hopefully I'll present to you again, and you'll see those floor plans, is a licensed home, and it is perfectly ADA, and it's really turning out to be beautiful.
So for the state of Michigan, then, as an unlicensed home, is the compensation to support staff different? It's unlicensed versus licensed?
Yes.
In the state of Michigan?
Yep. It is 50 cents less per hour. Yeah. In our unlicensed home, most of our staff work a couple shifts in each home. So they're sort of getting a mix. We like to think of it as the average.
Thank you, Jacob.
Yeah.
Jacob, could you define what is an unlicensed home?
Sure. And again, I don't want to get too technical because I don't know if Michigan and Pennsylvania are similar, but on a really broad scale, our licensed homes are called AFCs, which are adult foster care homes. So that means that JARC is being responsible for their entire life as if it was a child who was in foster care. They come to us, they pay us a cost of care, which includes their rent, their food, their utilities, their cable, everything is included in that. And that's usually for our folks that have higher medical needs or require more staff support. The unlicensed homes, and those licensed homes are very regulated. It's actually the second most regulated space in the country, and the first is nuclear power plants, right? So we're talking very intense. We can't have rugs, we can't have floors, we can't have carpets, exit signs have to be lighted, sprinklers. Our unlicensed homes are a little bit more lax. They're up to 4 people per home, and those don't have as many regulations and restrictions for licensing. Those are people that can be alone sometimes for up to 4 or 6 hours at a time. They don't have as many medical needs. They might still take medication, but they might not need, as high of medical care. And in general, they just need sort of a little bit less and lower supports than someone else in our licensed care would. All right, I will, oh, one more. Okay. So does any of this really matter? And the question is yes. And this is before I get into the integrative neighborhoods piece, and I know I'm running a little bit over, but this is Karen. She's been living with us since she turned 19, and she's now in her 50s. And I've gotten to know Karen really well. She lives in this home that we're renovating. This is her bedroom here in this corner. And one of the last steps was we had to decide what paint we were using in the house. And we went over there and we brought all kinds of swatches and we were really excited about it. And Karen, as you might have guessed, picked purple. And she came up to me after and she said, is this going to be in my room? And we said, yeah, what did you think we were picking on? She's like, oh, I thought we were just picking, our favorite colors. And she said, I've lived in a number of places. I've lived with Jark for the longest, and I've never once gotten to pick the color of my room. And that just like totally broke my heart, but it shows that it does matter, right? When we include person served, they live happier lives, right? Like obviously she would have picked purple. I don't know why we don't do that or didn't think of that in all of our homes. And now, as soon as somebody moves into Jark in any of our programs, the first question is, what color do you want your room painted? And that's how they sort of onboard into Jark. So we're proud of that. We have a lot of lessons. That was just last year that we figured that out. And we're 53 years into this. So I'll get into our integrative neighborhoods model. It's the newest model for supporting adults with developmental disabilities. So totally, a group home is not a good fit for everyone, and we totally understand that. One size does not fit all, right? Somebody that's able to cook and clean and has a job that might just need a couple hours here and there, right, to help them live as independently as possible is not going to be a good fit in a group home. It just doesn't make sense for them. And so a lot of parents, and this is, a much longer and larger conversation about the nature of the kinds of disabilities that we're seeing this now than we were 30, 40, 50 years ago because of the way that medicine has changed, the way parents have different decision-making powers now. The disabilities are also different, right? So autism spectrum disorder is the #1 diagnosis right now. And a lot of people with ASD don't need, right, 24-hour care. Some do for sure, and we'll support them in any way they need, but a lot want to live independently, and they might just not be able to live fully independently. And that's where Jark says, we are here to support you. So adults with disabilities and without live as independently as possible with or without roommates. So we like to have them sort of in a neighborhood. We call it integrative neighborhoods. It's made up of 10 to 20 people all living in the same apartment complex, if you'll think of it that way. Or we have different regulations here in Michigan than anywhere else, where you can't have more than 6 people that have a disability in the same structure, right? So a lot of the ones that we've chosen are wider, sprawling places that have smaller buildings. So 10 to 20 people all living in the same apartment or close by, right? So if it's like adjacent complexes. And staff support the individuals as needed according to their plans of service, right? So if your plan of service requires you, it gives you 8 hours of service per week, then great, we'll support 8 hours. If it requires 50 hours of service per week, right, we can make that work, right? So it's dependent on whatever the plan of service is. We call it the IPOS. I don't know if it's the same in Pennsylvania, but everything goes by that, right? And we will support somebody in however they choose to live. Social activities are regular and based on what the individuals themselves want. So they are creating their own sort of little mini community. So for example, it could be people that love go to the movies live in one apartment, or this pod loves going to the state fair and that's what they're all about. Or the current one that we have now loves game night and they have game night every week and they all love it. And that is the way that they socialize and the way they create their community. There is a staff on site overnight in case of emergencies. I will say over the course of the 3 years that we've been running this program, there has been one emergency, and it was the fire alarm was going off in their apartment, but it was not because if it was a fire. It was literally a malfunction with the unit. It wasn't actually a fire, but that person living there knew to call the emergency person. But other than that, there has been no emergencies, which is really great. All of the members of integrative neighborhoods are fully immersed in the JARC community, which is really great. So any of the other activities that they want to attend, you'll see this is sort of a movie night that we had for people, free of cost. They are part of JARC in that way. But a lot of times they don't want to, right? They don't necessarily want to socialize with people with different disabilities. And gosh, they want to live in part of their community, right? They want to do what they want to do, and that's okay. We really support them to do that. All the value add of the things that JARC offers, and that's really important. So we talk about that value add and what does that mean? Why sort of go with JARC, and why do families say, we want to be part of JARC, we want our son or daughter in this program? It's a permanent housing solution for parents, right? We all know it. It's the same way that JARC started in 1969. Parents said, I'm not going to be around forever. What's going to happen to my child when I die? And JARC is that solution, right? So JARC, again, whether it's me or somebody else, this is the institution that will be here to take care of your loved one after you're gone. Families used to, if you're familiar with the way that it works or the way that you might get staff now, or sort of like in the same way that respite works, right? If you have a disability and you have hours, you can be a direct hire and you can find someone, hire them. They are the employer of record. You have to manage all their taxes, their withholdings, right? All of that stuff. JARC will take care of all of that. HR, finance, philanthropy departments, right? So HR will do all of that, background checks and paperwork and all that stuff. Finance will make sure that bills are getting paid on time. Philanthropy, all the value add of all those social events and exciting calendar events happen through donor funded dollars that we have the power, right, to raise. And a peace of mind for families to know that they aren't always responsible. Again, I don't have a child with a disability. I don't have a disability, but when people join this program, their parents always say it is such a relief knowing that I'm not the first call, right? And before, if you lived at home or if they were away, they were always the first call, no matter what. And now there's such a hierarchy of staff of the way that it works for our staff that a parent is often is very even rarely called, right? Because if it's a real issue, of course we call the parent, but if the staff doesn't show up, if whatever, they get into an accident, it doesn't have to come to the parents. And then the last is all the extras of a 54-year-old institution in the community that has power of philanthropy, that has community connections, that can get on the phone, with people that are in power in this field and really be able to help. The future of the program is open more neighborhoods, of course, as many as possible, serving the communities wherever they need to be. We would love to cater to the Orthodox community more, which is really our next goal. Serve more people, of course, better and more programming that is more catered to more that what people want. And of course, just getting the word out to donors, volunteers about our community. And the last thing I'll say, and then I'll turn it over to questions. And sorry, I'm going a little long, Allison, than we originally talked about. But I think
You're fine. It's fine, Jacob.
Okay, I think what really makes me realize that this program is working and successful and worth investing in is we hear from parents that maybe their child has been living with us for 6 months or a year, and they'll say, I am just so shocked at how much Jason has blossomed and really opened up and changed. And 10 out of 10 times a person with a disability living at home and that same person living independently are different people, right? I think sometimes as just people in the community and parents, we sort of underestimate kids and people with disabilities. And I think having them live under their own roofs and have a little bit of responsibility for themselves really opens them up and shows how much they can do. And I think it's obviously the best, right? It might be scary for parents, and I totally understand that. And there's always bumps in the road, and it's always a difficult road to get there. But the sooner and the earlier and the more stable you can get your child into any program, the better they'll be in the long term, and the easier it will be for you, and you'll have peace of mind knowing. So again, that's just what works for JARC. We've had a lot of trial and error, but we think we're pretty good at it. And we would love to talk more about it. So if there are any other questions, please let me know.
Any plans to open a home business?
Yeah, that's gonna be my
We want you to team up with the branch.
Yeah.
I have a question. This is Judy Cohen, Jacob. It's nice to meet you. And I heard that you will work with people on the lifespan, but are you working with people with complex disabilities, real complex medical situations?
Yeah, so I should have added that as another bullet on future of the program. Totally, in this program, we would love to. We made it a little bit easier, not easier, um, I guess easier in a way, right? Where we sort of started with those lower supported individuals, right? That needed that 8 hours. We have one person in the queue that wants to move in that needs 24-hour care, and we're gonna make it work. So yes, and um, it definitely provides a different kind of a challenge, right? And obviously all the authorizations need to be set up and you need to have a one-on-one, right? There's all these other kinds of, behind the scenes work that I didn't talk about that really needs to get done. And we have a full-time person supporting this program because of that. Um, but the medical piece is absolutely correct. In Michigan, our direct service professionals cannot provide any medical care. So it's a little bit separate, right? Where we can't have somebody doing a catheter, or we can't even do wound care, right? So anything like that, we need to call a doctor or a nurse or a physician. So we have it separated. I don't know if that's the same there, but in a lot of ways, yes, we want to be able to support those people.
I have,
Okay.
I'll go with two. I have more than two questions, but do you have any issues in maintaining the direct support staff on a continuing basis out in Michigan?
Yes, anybody will say yes to that question. It is I've worked a couple shifts. I was lucky enough to take a person that we serve, not in this program, to Israel, and I staffed them for 10 days straight. It is hard work, right? There's no question. As parents, you know that. And I know that as well. I never for 1 second think that the work that we do, that our DSPs do, is not easy work. And frankly, they don't get paid nearly enough as they should. JARC has a ton of other benefits for our employees that I couldn't talk about in this presentation, but that does better than other providers. So we do have the highest retention rate among the people doing this kind of work in our county and really in the state of Michigan. We're currently paying more than Amazon. We're paying more than a lot of the grocery stores. So that helps, right, retain. But the burnout is totally high. There just are not enough perfect people in the world that can do this work. So yes, we have challenges with that. I would say that's consistently our biggest challenge, no question about it, is retaining staff, hiring good staff. And yeah, we have, of course, tons of other programs, and I'm happy to talk about that at a different time. But
just to follow up on your comment about the support staff and the payment that your organization is able to provide a greater salary, however you want to look at it, to your support staff. Does the state of Michigan, as the source of those funds, dictate that it has to be uniform for the particular service, or can you make adjustments to it and the state is okay with that?
yeah, I think the short answer is we can largely do whatever we want, right? We pay managers at a higher rate than we pay non-managers, right? The only thing we can't do is families and individuals can't, support the wages. So if you say, if JARC is paying $20 an hour, we're not, but if we're paying $20 and you as a dad say, I want to give an extra $5 to that support staff, you can't do that, right? That will get Medicaid funding pulled, but you can make a donation to JARC, which we pull into our larger bonus pool and our larger sort of pool to increase those employee wages. So yes, so we have a manager wage that is higher than our starting wage. We don't get paid for that, the difference between that.
Okay, well, the second question I have is, so you have 13 homes. Could you briefly give us some insights on, if you wanted to create a 14th home, what would be the steps that you would go through? For example, would your organization buy an existing home through funds through your organization and then do the modifications and then go from there? Or how do you get your funding for, say, the 14th home?
Yeah, so I'll say we own 13 homes. We operate in 20, which I think is really important to know, because we only own the homes because that's how JARC started, right? And that started, and I didn't include this, but the reason that we had to own homes is because people with disabilities could not sign a lease, right? People would not lease to them. They would not sell them houses. So we stepped in and said, okay, we'll buy the house. We'll lease to anybody, right? So that's how we started owning homes. I don't think as an organization, we want to be in the real estate market. We don't want to have a full-time market, maintenance person that's making sure that the roof's not caving in, because that is all money that we don't get reimbursed for. So that's just our cost. And we would like to have less of that, which is why I think this integrative neighborhoods program is really the future, because it puts the onus of the actual housing piece on the individual and on an apartment complex or on somewhere else where JARC is not the responsible party. But the way that it works is in two different ways, right? If we think that we need a new home, we will either, using philanthropy dollars or grant funding, we will buy a home and retrofit it to the needs that we feel like. More likely that happens is a parent will come to us and say, I have a house that I own that my daughter with disabilities lives in. She's looking for one roommate. Can you provide staffing for my daughter and the roommate? And we count that as one of our JARC homes, right? We're providing service in that property.
So the state of Michigan, this is real important. So the state of Michigan accepts the ownership of the house to an individual, but allows the disabled individual to live in that home and still get state funding.
Yes.
And through you and your support.
Yes, I will say, and again, it's a little complicated, but the person with the disability doesn't technically own the house, right? It's either a trust or it's a
Right.
family, and that's how the Medicaid funding comes through.
Right,
And
so.
in that example, is that an unlicensed home, Jacob?
Yes, exactly right. That is an unlicensed home, which is not bad or good, right? But we own all of our licensed homes because we think we have to, right? I can't trust somebody else to make sure that they're going to meet all their licensing requirements when there are so many of them if we're not in control of that house.
Okay,
Okay, well, he asked one of my questions, the direct support staff, because that's, I think, overall, but what I'm trying to understand with the example that you gave, why, so you're going in and it's a client and it's their home. Why do you not license as opposed to unlicensed? Is there a plus or negative in that for the agency or for the client? Because I'm trying to understand, I thought licensing was the safe thing to do as opposed to unlicensing.
I'll say it's so dependent, and our system in Michigan is not perfect at all. The way we see it, it comes down to we want person to be in the least restrictive environment as possible. And we feel that licensing creates restrictions, right? A rug is a perfect example. In our licensed house, we can't have any rugs at all because the state or whoever created the licensing regulations feels that it's a tripping hazard. So if you have somebody that does not have a lot of needs or only has 4 hours of support staff a week and wants to paint their room purple and have a poster of David Bowie on the wall, they can't have a rug in that room. That is a restrictive environment for them. So the people that live in our licensing households, a lot of times, I think 9 out of 10 times, are a lot of times not able to communicate, right? So they may be nonverbal, they have higher medical needs. And what that means, because of the way the state regulates and works in our houses, that the least restrictive environment for them is that licensed house that has all of those restrictions, but not everybody needs to live that way.
So then why would anybody get a license? How? I don't understand it. Why do you even go through getting licensing? What is the plus in having a licensed house?
So-
What are we getting out of it?
I'm gonna jump in. I think that's a really important question, but maybe a longer question than what Jacob can answer in a minute or two. So Jacob, this is Judy again. You want to give her an answer, but it's something we're gonna continue to talk about, Lynn, because
Yeah.
all of us have
Yeah.
big issues. I think Dave's gonna talk about it. I think,
Okay.
you had a question?
I have a real quick question, I hope. Are you familiar with JARC in Florida and Boca? And if so, how would you contrast your environment to what they've built out there?
Yes, we are familiar with them only because we often get a lot of their donations. People in Dark Michigan. So I'm close with the development director there and say, hey, is this tribute for you or is it for us? Largely the same in the fact that we both support individuals and adults with developmental disabilities. very different in the way we do it, only because Florida is a very difficult state when it comes to funding for people with disabilities. And so the structure is totally entirely different in Florida, but largely the same work. And on the licensing question, I'm not a licensing expert. It's not my field at all, but I will say the needs for people who live in AFC, adult foster care homes, are they cannot live anywhere else. It is a safety hazard for them to be in a less restrictive environment. So that is why largely that they live in a licensed home. It is not for everybody. And the state of Michigan has all but stopped giving out licenses because there are enough licensed houses in the community. It's not what the community needs right now.
I think we're gonna end on that note. We have two other speakers for the evening, and it's 7:30, the end at 8. But Jacob, this is amazing. I think we will have you back. We really, really appreciate your time tonight, and I know I have your contact information as Allison does. Are you open to hearing from parents with questions if
Yes.
anybody wants to follow up with you? Okay.
Absolutely. And if I can't answer, I will certainly route to the right person. And I will be in Pittsburgh next year for the Network of Jewish Human Service Agencies. So I'm happy to come again if in person.
Great.
Thank you.
I want to live independently, and I don't want to remain.
I wanted to promote this talk. We have a talk coming up at the end of the month, a 2-hour virtual workshop that really builds on what you're doing here. It's talking about how are we building the home and community-based system that we started to build in the 1970s, which is what Jacob talked about, the closing of the institutions. So the Western PA Disability History and Action Consortium is doing an event. It's in honor, really, of the closing of Polk Center in Venango County, which it's one of the last 4 institutions in Pennsylvania. Was the biggest one in Pennsylvania, and has a notorious reputation. It's finally closed, and there's 2 more institutions left in Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania has the not so great reputation of still having a couple of institutions. They're not the terrible places that they used to be, but we shouldn't have any, because we have another level, which is similar to what Jacob was talking about with the medical, the more, support heavy homes that can be done. So I encourage you to attend our event. Okay, so Mark just said he wants to live independently, but he does not want a roommate. So that's his choice. We, 25 years ago, bought a house for our family. We have another son who's in his 30s. Mark's 28. And it's a home that we made extremely accessible. It has an elevator, ramps, everything you can imagine that helps Mark with his daily physical needs. And so we've had that for about 25 years. And we then had a house, there's a house next door that went up for sale about 20 years ago, and we bought that house. And it's similar in size to the one we have, and we kind of rented it for a while, but then we stopped renting it. Now it's just like an overflow house for our house. We still live in the first house with Mark. His brother's in California, so he's not really here to be part of our future plan for where, how Mark's living situation is going to play out. Mark has a consolidated waiver. He has home care pretty much all the time, not overnight, but from about 9 in the morning till sometime in the evening, there's somebody there, whether it's a nurse, a hab aide, and then, he's really used to having support staff in the home and out in the community. But the problem is, as all of you know, that the parents have to coordinate all that care. So, and if that care is not in place, then we are by default the primary caregiver. So that's the situation. We're trying to move from that situation because that's not a viable future plan. My husband Dave and I are not going to be around forever. We're not going to be physically as able as we are forever. And so we have to have a plan that actually works in the future. So what we're trying to do is to get rid of that coordination primarily and get out of the primary caregiver role, although, as you can see, we're not really primary caregivers 24 hours a day, just a few hours. So what we have started to pursue, we started this 3 years ago, is to look at the concept of a licensed home, which from what I understand from Jacob, Michigan's a little different. I think what he's calling a licensed home is like the homes that Verlin runs up in the North Hills, I believe, that are more medically oriented. Their unlicensed homes that he's describing are like our licensed homes, and our licensed homes here don't require things like you can't have carpeting. So there are requirements for sure in a licensed home, but they're not like a medical facility, nothing like that. So we started to walk down the path with an agency in Pittsburgh. We live in Highland Park, by the way. And we started to work with them. They have about 50 homes that they run in Allegheny and Westmoreland County. And could they make Mark's home a licensed home that they would run? And, so we would go through that process with them. They worked with us for a couple of years. We made a few tweaks to the house that needed to be done to meet state regulations. And the house is 100% ready to be licensed, but they ran into a problem, and that was the ownership of the house, which is, David's going to talk more about that too. The ownership in Pennsylvania, there's not a lot of clarity to it. And we and other people are really trying to get a handle on who can own a house that can be licensed. And the latest that we've heard from ODP is a family member cannot own that home, not a parent, not a sister, brother, cousin, or anything. But there are some people who think that that is a misinterpretation of the policy. So there's people working on that to see, because that's important. If that home is owned by a family member, you want it to be able to be licensed. And with a licensed home, it doesn't have to be owned by the agency. The agency can pay rent. There's a structure for it, and I'm sure that Jacob is engaged in that with those unlicensed homes. So we ran into a problem with the licensing because the home is in Mark's Special Needs Trust, but it's not, the real estate itself is not in the trust. It was because of the way the trust was, the place where we have the trust did not want to have real estate, so they asked for us to put the title in Mark's name, which we did about 10 years ago, and they put a lien on the house. So it is in the trust, but it's not directly in the trust. That is definitely a no-no for the state of Pennsylvania. He can't own a house. It can't be in his name and be licensed. So we have to rearrange the ownership of the house. And so we have a couple of pathways we're going. One way is to, we could purchase it, or if we could straighten out if a relative can own it, that's one way. Another way is to try to convince the trust agency to bend the rule and put the house directly in his trust. And another way is to actually move his trust away from that trust agency to another trust agency that will accept real estate. So we're now in the third year. After 2 years of getting the house ready, then we're in the third year now of trying to get the ownership right. And once the ownership is right, we're going to select an agency. When I heard about their agency, I was like, philosophy should be the driving force of everything. So it really refreshed my idea that we have to be interviewing agencies in terms of their beliefs, not just how they do business and how they staff homes, but what do they believe? And I liked hearing what he believes. And we also are aware, even though Mark does not want a roommate, and even though we know that because of he has medical complexity, we know that we probably could make a case for him to be a single home, a single resident in a licensed home. It probably could happen. It does happen all the time. I've been interviewing a lot of families, and I know that it happens. But So he does not want a roommate. But the fact of the matter is that might be a trade-off that we have to do. We might have to say it's okay. If this is going to get us where we need to go, the state is saying that's it. We will do it and make it work. So that's mine, and I'll be happy to take questions later.
So Judy asked me to give a summary of some meetings that I've had over the last couple of weeks. So I'm going to go through the agenda items on the first two meetings, and then I'll talk to you about the results from those two meetings. So for the first meeting, the first agenda item was the inclusion or the transfer of real estate or a house into a disabled individual's Achieva Family Special Needs Trust. That was the first item, which was directly what Tina was talking about. The second item was an IRA RMD management question as related to the Secure Act that was passed in 2020, and I'll talk a little bit in detail about that. The third item was addressing whether the Achieva Family Trust can function as a trustee, even though the trust funds are held by an outside wealth management company, not held by Achieva, but by some other company. And the fourth item had to do with addressing the federal trust tax liability question when the parents pass away. And I'll give you some more background on that. The agenda for the second meeting, and this is directly into Tina's concern and question and direction, is to discuss the Pennsylvania state position that the ownership of a house by a direct sibling is not acceptable as a licensed house in the state of Pennsylvania. And so that was the agenda for that second meeting. That was the sole objective. So for the first meeting, I'll just run through the results of those agenda items. The first had to do with the real estate or the house being included into the Achieva Family Trust. So they had an opportunity to provide Ted and myself their concerns and why that has not been done at this point. So they went through their concerns, and both Ted and I gave them suggestions on how to alleviate those concerns and allow the Achieva Family Trust to accept that real estate into the trust. We also then provided them a copy of another trust that does accept real estate or the house into the trust, so they could use that as a guide. And they were very interested in that. So the direction on this issue is that they are going to take this question to their board of directors in the fall and start the process of seeing if they're willing to accept that real estate or the house into the disabled individuals special needs trust, or whatever you want to call it, the trust under Achieva. So the good news is they didn't say no, which was great. And they are going to look at it and get back to us as they go through their process. So there's more work to go on this. But I think Ted and I were able to give them some suggestions on overcoming some of the concerns that the president and the director of special strategic operations had by doing that. Up to this point, they had not accepted real estate into the trust for that disabled individual. So more to go, Tina. It's moving forward. But the second agenda item is IRA management. It's really coming into play for those individuals that either the wife, spouse, has significant funds that are IRA dollars in their estate. And this all comes out because of the Secure Act that occurred in 2020, passed by the federal government. So the issue is not whether they accept IRA dollars, because the Achiever Family Trust does accept them. It's the management of those funds that's the critical thing. So I explained to them the new regulations that are in the Secure Act. There are 4 conditions that the trust must meet. There are 3 other conditions that the custodian of these IRA monies or accounts has to do in order to maximize the funds for the disabled individual. If the custodian doesn't do it properly, or the trust is not written properly, the federal government will deny the stretching out of those funds over the beneficiary's lifetime and go back to the 10-year rule. And I walked them through some numbers to give them a sense of how important this is, because it's not an insignificant amount of dollars, especially for people that have a large amount of dollars in their IRAs, and that will go into their estate once they pass away. So basically, the Achiever Family Trust has designated Baird as their custodian of these IRA accounts. And they'll manage this. There is another action that I'm doing personally, because there's pending legislation out there which is adding more requirements on the custodian. And if they miss it, if they don't do it right, it reverts back to what they call the 10-year rule, which means all those IRA funds would have to be distributed within 10 years, as opposed to distributed over, say, 30 or 40 years, which is the lifespan of this disabled individual. And it's, for those that have a large amount of dollars, this is a significant thing. It's not small dollars, it's large amounts of dollars. And of course, it's very dependent on each family, right? It's gonna be different for everybody, but this is an important thing. So we walked them through this scenario and why it's important and why that is. So more to go on that. This is something we're going to be working through with Bear, who is the Achievers Family Trust custodian for those accounts. Relative to the question of whether the Achiever Family Trust can be a trustee of the funds, even though it's administered by an outside management team. And the answer is yes, they're willing to do that. So that was good. Relative to the federal tax liability question, this is after the parents have passed away. The answer is yes, they would do that. That would be assigned to Ernst & Young, which is the accounting company for the Achiever Family Trust, similar to what they do with the state tax return for the trust right now. Of course, there's an additional fee that's attached to that, but that would come out of the trust. So we went through these 4 items. Obviously, for this group, the main one is whether the trust takes the real estate or the house into the trust, how that would work. I like to think Ted and I were relatively successful in giving them some suggestions that would alleviate some of their concerns. We'll see. Relative to the second meeting, and this is getting back to Tina's question, the good news is we talked this through about what the state of Pennsylvania dictates relative to whether a licensed home could be owned by a sibling or a direct relative. Okay, the reason why this came up is they have said myself and I think some others, the state's position relative to this. So we talked to the president of the ARC of the Greater Pittsburgh, and she has set a meeting for, I think, October 16th with an attorney who's very familiar with the regulations within the state to see if indeed that is correct interpretation. One of the other questions that we had in the discussion is whether that state regulation is being driven by a federal regulation that is being passed down from the federal room or federal governor to the state of Pennsylvania. If that's the case, then getting this regulation changed is going to be a little bit more difficult because it's driven by the federal folks. On the other hand, if it's just a state regulation, maybe there's some things we can do as a group to try to get that changed. So that October 16th meeting that this individual is going to have with the attorney is going to look at, again, whether the federal regulations are driving that, whether the Pennsylvania state interpretation is correct. And then the final question is, depending on how that works out, what options do individuals or parents that have children with disabilities have? So more to go on that one, but that's the attorney. So that.
What about unlicensed home? What does that mean in Pennsylvania? That's going to be relevant to a lot of you that have younger children. Right now, the status quo is that what we're understanding as an unlicensed home is kind of like, imagine our situation, like if we could organize 24 hours of care for Mark, and it's 100% done, and let's say there's one agency that's running it, and they've got people in there doing everything. It's an unlicensed home, so they don't have all these kind of regulations about, you have to have a manager and a manager of the manager and all that, but you're staffing that home 24/7 for that individual, but it's not licensed. So why is that not viable in Pennsylvania? Because of the staff. The funds are not there for the agency to staff that home and manage that home in a safe way, so that the agency, that's a viable financial thing to do. And so that's why that's an area of growth for advocacy, I think, to say, is there a model for unlicensed home where you have 24-hour staffing run by an agency, but it's adequately compensated so that the agency can actually afford to do it. So, like right now, we could take a step and we could say, let's just say Achieva, for example. Achieva, I want you to find 24-hour staff for Mark, and I want you to run his home and manage his staff. We've already had this conversation. They tried it with one other person. They said, we can't afford to do that. We need the larger amounts that come with a licensed home. To do it the other way, which is essentially staffing and making sure everything is safe, is not viable for an agency right now.
Why are you doing all this work with Achieva?
Well, our first step was to start with Achieva because many years ago we created a third-party trust under the Achieva Family Trust organization for our son. So we've been dealing with them for a good long time. So we started with Achieva. In terms of the vision, we realized that my wife and I are not going to be here, for terms of forever. So we need to make plans for our son who needs that 24/7 support. Relative to housing, we've looked at a number of houses that some of the providers are either modifying or are planning to modify. We're struggling with what type of home. The answer to, I'll jump to this latest question. One of the things that I looked at is, in our judgment, we have to go with the licensed home because the funding from the state, based on my review of the data that I have, is much greater for a service when it's a licensed tool. And,
That was my
and
understanding.
in Pennsylvania, at least the way I read the data that I have, it's almost a factor of 4 difference between a licensed and an unlicensed home for a particular service. And it changes from service to
I
service.
also think it safeguards the agency, like, the agency wouldn't want to take it on if it wasn't licensed. That's the impression I kept having with Jean, with my conversations with them.
Well, so that's leading to answer your question, Judy. So the reason why my wife and I are pursuing this whole ownership question is we want to feel secure that if our son is in a residential setting and we're passed away, that he'll always have that setting, that he will not be forced to move to another location that may not be fitting for him. We want that to be set. So his home is set, his staff is set.
That's why he wanted in his name.
No,
Or the family member, who's gonna own the house when you're done all this? Who will own the house? Your trust?
No, it doesn't necessarily have, well, first of all, our house is not ADA compliant. So, if you look at the regulations as I read them, they are numerous regulations about what a licensed home has to have, right? And our home is not that, and it would never get there because we'd have to make so many modifications. The modifications are not only on ramps and access, but things like if you have a fire, you have to be able to evacuate the home within a certain number of seconds or minutes, and with everybody. So our home would not be ADA compliant without major changes. So we're forced to either find a home, build a home, that our son will be set for the rest of his life.
But you all will own it, or the trust will own it. It's not gonna be owned by the agency, is that correct?
Correct. I've talked to a number of parents, and one of the concerns I continually hear about is if it's owned by a provider, what happens if that provider goes bankrupt or decides not to do that service, or decides to demand that child be moved to another location because of whatever issues, right? Whether they're valid or not. So I'm concerned just having the provider own the home. So the question is, get an ownership of it with an agency or organization that I feel is good, that would not be in that same provider mode, such as like Achieva Family Trust or some other entity. Get support staff 24/7 for my son, so that I know that he's taken care of, and of course, write a fairly detailed list of things that we would like for him to do and have and be able to do as part of his daily life. So, and sort of, because I've had a number of, when these parents had the issues with the provider, the argument that came back was, well, then the state's going to take over and be that. Remember, this is under the basis that my wife and I are no longer here. So the answer that we got was, well, the state will make sure that he's in a good location. And while that may happen, I don't feel comfortable leaving it as unclear as that. So I want to make, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Neither one of these examples, do they have a sibling that, like, do you have another sibling?
No.
Okay.
No,
Tina's is in.
Older son is in California and not
Okay.
moving back to the.
The rest-
Because what I'm looking at is if they did have a sibling or another, like, say, another family member that was willing to do it, like, do you have another family member
Willing to do what, then?
be the owner of the house?
But the understanding is right now that relatives cannot own the house and have it licensed for any individual with a disability.
Now,
That's,
I was not told that, because and he literally knows that my daughter is going to be the owner of the house, and he literally said, I want it that way, and I lease it from her.
That will work. Based on the regulations, as I understand them, the Pennsylvania State
Okay.
Department of Human Resources,
Now,
I guess
he's worked in
ODP.
he's worked in ODP his whole life, and he's talking, okay, now I'm gonna get back to him, and I'm gonna say this, because he literally told
he,
me.
by the way, is Gene Cook.
Gene Cook, right, he literally said that she would be the owner of the house.
So
And it's
Gene-
going to be a licensed group home with Gene Cook overseeing all the services. Well, that, yeah.
When the agency we're working with tried to get the house licensed, and if they saw the title was in
What was the
Marquis
EPC?
Achieva. When they went through the computer application and who the house is in the title of the, and they put Mark's name in it, stop, can't go any further.
Meaning the brother? You've
No, I am at Achieva applying for, on the computer to have,
No, I'm not, I'm saying the sibling's gonna own it, not
So-
the
so that's what we're trying to
If you
clarify,
can-
whether the house could be owned by.
ODP sent me an email which had the exact Pennsylvania regulation about this issue.
And I'll get right back to Gene,
And so, if-
because Gene told me it's
So
by.
we're not going to resolve this
Right.
tonight.
But if you get it resolved in
We would like to
favorably,
know what
that
he-
would be something I'd like to
So maybe
know.
we invite Gene to come in. It would be very interesting to hear that.
Well, I've asked Gene
Yeah.
to come in, because I've had long
Yeah.
conversations with him about this. because-
We will talk, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, Mark, yes.
Really appreciate tonight the complexity of the issues and how the needs vary so
Yes.
much from one family to another.
They do.
Somebody has one question.
And,
Let her do it.
and some of the issues for advocacy became clear tonight, so, really great stuff.
Yeah, we're just tip of the iceberg. Was there one last
You had a
question?
question.
Well, it
wasn't so much a question, because we just recently went through setting up EB, she's a third-party trust, she's a full trust, so we did really a different organization. And that's why I said, and of course, I'm gonna be calling him tomorrow. But the thing that they did say over and over through this, that we wouldn't have a problem having a property within her trust.
Right, that's,
Right. We are aware that there are other trusts out there that allow.
who owns but who's the house owner?
It would be owned by the trust.
That's a different
Right.
situation.
Right.
Which
Yeah.
We under-
agency is that?
Yeah, do you mind sharing that? Who you're talking?
Three Rivers,
Uh,
Fiduciary, and Enbridge.
You're talking about Rich and Eric. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to bring them in too. Okay. Obviously, we have a lot more to talk about. I'm really grateful for everyone's input, and we're going to send an email out, Allison, yes, about topics for future meetings, so maybe we stick with creative housing, innovative housing, and continue that conversation. Just thank you, everybody. Do you want to
Thank
make
you.
any last?
Or if there's something that you want us to bring in, maybe let us know,
Yeah.
And well,
you know?
do you want Gene Cook to come in?
I
I asked
think-
him, he
I
said
think-
he'll come in and
Yeah,
talk.
yeah, Brian Benham and I were just talking about that. I think so. He sounds like he's one of the more innovative and open
Well, he
agencies.
worked at ODP.
Yeah.
He worked at.
But talk to him about what we talked about. So good night, everybody. Thank you.